So instead of doing guessing and checking, which you can certainly practice and get good at if you want, we're going to go through the remaining examples of this section using that step-by-step process I talked about. So first, looking at this, there's no greatest common factor. There's nothing that they're all divisible by. And there's a number in front of the x squared. So we're not going to be able to put just down x at the beginning of each parentheses. So our step-by-step process says I take the first number and multiply it by the last number. Here, 6 times -1, we get -6. Now I want to figure out what can I multiply to get that answer that adds up to the coefficient of the middle term. And here, x is the same thing as 1x. So I'm trying to think, what can I multiply to get a -6 that would add up to a +1? And since it's a -6, I've got to put in a negative sign somewhere. Making it a -1 or a -6 wouldn't help the pair add up to 1. But if I put a negative in front of the 2, -2 times -3 is -6. -2 plus -3 is +1, which is what I was looking for. So remember, we can't write the answer yet. We're going to leave the first term alone. We're going to use those numbers we just found, -2 and +3, to split up the middle term. Instead of +1x, we're going to have -2x plus 3x, like that. And now we're going to do factoring by grouping. For the first group, 6x squared minus 2x, I can factor out a 2 from both of those, and I can factor out an x from both of those. So to see what's left, I'm going to divide them both by 2x. 6x squared divided by 2x is 3x. Minus 2x divided by 2x is -1. Now looking at that next group, there is no greatest common factor. There's no number I can divide them both by, no variable that's in both of them. When there's no greatest common factor, you just put a 1 there. 3x minus 1 is the same thing as 1 times 3x minus 1. So that's important. When you're doing factoring by grouping and there is no greatest common factor other than 1, then you just put 1 times what you've got there. Now look, we've got that same parentheses in both parts, the 3x plus 1. So I move that 3x plus 1, 3x minus 1 to the front. And then from the first part, I have a 2x left over. From the next part, I have a +1 left over. Now, you may have been able to work through that one faster by guessing and checking, but I really like for my students to learn this process because sometimes guessing and checking is just about impossible. Let's take a look at our next one. Here we have 12x squared minus 5x minus 2, and we're going to go through our step-by-step process. There's no greatest common factor in all three terms. There's a number in front of the x squared, so when I see that, I'm going to follow my process. So we have the first number of 12 times the last number of -2. 12 times -2 is -24. Now we're trying to think of what we can multiply to get a -24 that's going to add up to our middle number, which in this case is -5. So let's see, for 24, there would be 1 and 24, but putting a negative sign in there isn't going to help, so that pair is not going to work. I could also do 2 times 12. Putting a negative with one of those, that's not going to help me get a -5. I could also do 3 times 8. This one actually is going to work. Putting a negative in front of the 3 wouldn't help, but putting a negative with the 8 definitely does help. 3 times -8 is -24. 3 plus -8 is the -5 that I'm looking for. So remember, once you find the two numbers that you're looking for, you leave the first term alone, and you use those two numbers that you just found to split up the middle term. Instead of -5x, we have +3x and -8x. And then we leave the last term alone. So you leave the first and last term alone, you find the two numbers that you need, and you use those to rewrite that middle term. Now we do the factoring by grouping. From our first two terms, 12x squared plus 3x, we could factor out a 3x from both of those. So to see what's left, we divide them both by 3x. 12x squared divided by 3x is 4x. 3x divided by 3x is just 1. Now looking at that next group, remember something we talked about earlier on when we were working on these? When your second group starts with a minus, you have to factor out something negative. So even though they're both divisible by 2, we're not just going to factor out 2. We need to factor out a minus 2 because the group starts with a negative. So I'm going to divide them both by minus 2. Negative 8x divided by negative 2 is a positive 4x. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is a plus 1. And now look, we've got that same group in each one. So we put 4x plus 1 at the front. Then we've got 3x from our first group and minus 2 from our next group. And that's it. Now, anytime you're not sure if you've done a factoring problem right, remember you could always check it by doing the FOIL method. So let's say you had a problem like this on the test and you wanted to take your time to check it. If we do the two first terms, 4x times 3x, we would get 12x squared. The outside terms, 4x times minus 2 would be minus 8x. The inside terms, 1 times 3x would be plus 3x. The last terms, 1 times negative 2 would be minus 2. And then when we combine those two like terms in the middle, we get 12x squared minus 5x minus 2, and that is what we started with, so we know that we did factor it correctly.